Welcome back to the Seeing Red podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Fulce, and I'm your only host now. Andi has decided to leave the show, at least temporarily, but probably permanently. She's taking a new job out of state, and we wish her the best of luck. She's probably watching the show right now and sending us good vibes. She will almost certainly return as a guest in the near future to kind of give you a lowdown a little bit what she's doing. But in the meantime, we have crazy news going on. We took a 2-month break. Donald Trump got shot. The president decided not to run for re-election, and that was only a couple of the things that happened over the hiatus. Several times I thought about jumping back on, but wanted to give myself a true break and come back in strong as we sprint towards the election and into the session. So with that, we're going to be starting off today talking about Sid Miller, the Texas Voice, our friend of the show. Mark McCaig dropped just a bombshell this morning or yesterday morning when he released a story about Sid Miller spending taxpayer dollars and having several expenses reimbursed to go campaign for a Texas House candidate. Now, A.G. Louderback was running for an open seat. He's the former sheriff of Jackson County. He's a frequent guest on Fox News, and he was in a tough primary race that he ended up winning with the support of Sid Miller and Don Buckingham, Ken Paxton. And I've met Sheriff Louderback a number of times. I like him a lot. He's a pretty nice guy. So this isn't to necessarily speak to anything to him. The story lays out that Sid Miller was doing a campaign swing for him. Both Sheriff Louderback and Sid Miller posted several posts on social media, Facebook, what have you, X or whatever, saying that, I'm going out and I'm campaigning in the campaign swing campaign events. And since he's a former sheriff and he's not currently in office, it wasn't as if these were state events that were, quote unquote, state events that Sid Miller was going to. Well, Mark McCaig submitted some public information requests and found the logs for that. And Sid Miller requested mileage reimbursement and all sorts of travel reimbursement, and received a few $100s in reimbursement to do that trip. Hotel overnight stay plus all the miles to drive wherever he drove to from Austin. It's a pretty flagrant violation, and it's just one of many things that Sid Miller has done. A reminder, he was reported to have gone to Oklahoma on the state dime to receive nutritional shots of vitamins or whatnot, some magical quote unquote. It was referred to as Jesus shots for some reason, and he did that. It was up in Oklahoma, and he decided to expense it to the state account, his travel to and from. Didn't get any charges. I think he was able to tie it somewhat back to a state account. But then his chief, political advisor, a man named Todd Smith, was arrested a couple years ago for allegedly selling hemp licenses. Texas passed laws allowing people to grow hemp, which is marijuana plant, but it's like the ones that don't have the psychoactive buds on them. So hemp's a very good rope. It has been. It's been around in America for a long time. And but because of the marijuana component, you have to get licenses for it. And Todd Smith was alleged, and that trial should be going to actual trial in the next couple months, depending on whether or not the judge lets Todd Smith's attorney back out of the case or not for violating the attorney-client agreement. That's a little inside baseball. But this is just another thing Sid Miller's done. Sid Miller is, I'll be honest, in 2013, 2014, when he was running for ag commissioner, I saw him speak probably a dozen times at various events, rural, suburban, Dallas County, what have you, as I was working on a different statewide campaign in a different race, and I liked him. He gives a great speech, and he's very good on person to person. There's a reason he won that race, and he continues to win. He's very, very affable. But the man has surrounded himself, it seems, with corrupt individuals. He himself is continuously shown to, if not be corrupt, then just to be a poor steward of the taxpayers' dollars. He goes out of his way, it seems, to benefit himself whenever possible via the taxpayer. And if you were a businessman trying to get more money from his business for one way or another, I could see it. I could see that. I mean, that's a whatever. But when you're a public servant, you're not supposed to enrich yourself off of the public. And it is wrong of him to continue to keep doing that. And there needs to be some sort of account. Now, there are a number of laws that he's violated, allegedly, if these things are, if an investigator looks at it. With different laws, I think he would be tried. I think he's from Erath County in Stephenville. There's all sorts of stuff that goes with who would prosecute, whether it's just a TEC issue or whatever the case may be. I don't suspect to see anything. You may see some sort of censure or repudiation from the House or some investigation. You could see that. Given what happened last year, you probably won't, but it's possible. But regardless, it's sickening that we continue to just that is the reaction to just more corruption from Sid Miller and from these groups of people in the Republican Party that win power, and then we just excuse their actions that are flagrantly illegal and immoral, and just not for the good of the party or the state. Which probably one of the reasons why so few people donated to Matt Rinaldi or to the Republican Party when Matt Rinaldi was chairman of the party. They had this convention back in the end of May for the Republican Party convention. It was supposed to make about $100,000. Other conventions have made more than that, and sometimes that people lose money. Well, they brought in more money than they were expecting, but they also spent a lot more than they intended to spend or budgeted to spend. And instead of making $100,000, they lost like $337,000. And they had to pull that money from federal accounts. Federal dollars, even for a party, are so much harder to raise than state dollars because of limits on how much money a party can get from an individual donor. So let's say on the state account for statewide races, etc., donor can write a blank check basically, and that's how it goes. And for conventions, you can get corporate sponsorships for conventions. They didn't have that. They had some of it. They didn't have enough, and in order to cover the cost of the convention, they had to pull it from their federal accounts. So that's what I'm seeing is being reported, and that is just one of the craziest things, because the federal dollars are spent on federal races because there's all the limits and all the whatever else. So we're talking about our Ted Cruz. We're talking about Tony Gonzalez. Now, you might not like Tony Gonzalez. You might not have wanted him to win the primary against Herrera, but he's way better than any Democrat from that seat, right? We still need Republicans to hold these seats. There are going to be other seats that we could possibly flip. You never know what's going to happen with that with any given year, and we don't have any opportunity to actually run those programs that the party should be running because we don't have enough money. It's been an absolute failure of just the leadership of the Defend Texas Liberty, Tim Dunn, West Texas cohort of individuals in any seat that they get into. Then you have folks like, obviously, Ken Paxton, which with his alleged corruption and all the stuff that went from there, that flowed from it. But regardless, there is a problem with corruption. And when I look back at Texas history, and I'm sorry, this might bore you, but I'm going to take you back a little bit to kind of talk to you a little bit about what Texas looked like 100 years ago and how the Democrats went from having not just all the statewide seats, but having every elected official in the state government to being out of power completely. And, after Reconstruction, the Democrats just took over. Basically, you had to be not a Republican. You had to be a Democrat to win anything because everyone hated Republicans so much because of Abe Lincoln and the Civil War. And So everyone lived within the Democratic Party, conservatives, liberals, and what that looks like in the 19th century. That continues until 1928, and until 1928, you see the occasional Republican win, and it's like they'll hold it for a term or two. And I'm talking at the state house. I'm talking like you might get a congressman from Texas that's a Republican for like a year or two, just kind of randomly. Uh, from there, you end up getting in 1928. There was a massive splinter of the Republican Party at the national level, or sorry, the Democrat Party at the national level. It's a majorly broker convention in Houston, I think. Yeah, in Houston. And Al Smith emerges as the Democratic candidate against Herbert Hoover. Well, Al Smith was a Catholic from New York, and I think it was kind of a prohibition slash something to do with Jim Crow or segregation split. And Texas and several other southern states wouldn't vote for Al Smith, and they ended up going for the Democratic Party ended up lobbying and working for the Herbert Hoover campaign in that election. Well, that flips again for 5 terms. So you get three. FDR wins 4 races, and Truman wins a race before the Republicans are able to win again in Texas. And this time again, no senators, no statewide elections going to Republicans. Eisenhower comes in. He's able to win Texas. Now, Eisenhower was seen as kind of a nonpartisan figure. He's a massive war hero. He was credited with winning the war in Europe, all sorts of stuff. And he was born in Texas, so I'm sure that played a part, but he won several southern states. And then Kennedy wins Texas back. Johnson's able to keep it. And when Kennedy taps Johnson, he leaves the Senate. And there's a special election for the Senate seat. And it's won by a Republican. Now, that seat, everyone looked at it as like, oh, that's a fluke. John Tower's going to lose and whatever. Well, John Tower didn't lose. John Tower was able to build some credibility. He focused on himself. He didn't do much party building, but he was able to prove that a Republican could win. A few years after that win, while he's in the Senate, about 10 years later, in this like 71, 72, there's what's called the Sharpstown scandal. It's probably the biggest scandal ever to hit Texas. And effectively what was happening was there was a banker named something Sharp here in Houston that was able to figure out a way to basically pay state officials to do things that wasn't or was questionably legal. Basically, he'd give them stock tips and free loans or loans with 0% interest, or basically he'd give them a loan for like, let's say $20,000 to pay for a stock in something that he knew was going to go up because he had inside information. And, they buy the stock with the loan, the would go up, and then they'd pay the loan back, and then they'd get that money back, what they got from the stock as their win. So it wasn't technically paying people. It was a really weird thing, but it was discovered. And he was charged, and it was released as well that the governor was involved with it, the lieutenant governor and the speaker of the House, knocked off everybody. There was a full-blown like flip of people in the big 3 positions. Some people resigned, some people decided not to run for election, some people lost re-election. And a lot of other people, the bench was cleared out too. So a lot of Democrats that with experience got cleared out of public office. A lot of people started looking at the Democrats as being not the best options, and several Republicans were able to win some state House seats and some state Senate seats. So all this is happening, and by 1978, Bill Clements is able to, who's independently wealthy, is able to say, you know what, I think there's it here. Republicans couldn't get donations, but he's like, I think there's a chance. And he goes in and he wins an election with like 49.6% of the vote to 49.3. He barely won the election. He's becomes the first Republican to win statewide. All of it rooted from that massive loss of talent from being caught up in corruption. And right now, there are a lot of Republicans who are caught up in corruption, and they haven't figured the authorities haven't figured out how to piece it all together yet. But if there's smoke, there's probably fire, and they need to be really careful and stop doing whatever it is they're doing, because it's going to end up biting them in the ass, and it's going to bite the whole party in the ass. Because then the Democrats will be able to seize. Because the Republican Party attack. I mean, the Ted Cruz only beat Beto by 3 points. Trump only won Texas by 5.5 points in the last election. These elections are getting closer and closer and closer. The Republicans aren't running up the score by 20, 30 points anymore. I think John Cornyn in like 2008 or 2014, anyway, he won by something like 30% one year. It was like 63 to 33 or something like that, right? Abbott won his first election by over 20 points. It's been slowly getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And it's still a massively comfortable lead, right? But if the right macro circumstances happen, and that's to say, if what's happening at the national level hits Texas in a certain way, and you have this corruption that's dripping, a lot like the Clintons drip, mind you, from the scorecard kind of DLT faction of the party, like it's going to blow up in everyone's faces, even people who've been publicly against these actions, people who voted for the impeachment and who've called out this corruption. We got to be really, really mindful of this when we're looking at when we're vetting candidates and when we're giving people a microphone. So that's just kind of all these things that have been happening. Ken Paxton's also going after the State Fair of Texas. This is a little bit different because there's two conservative values at play, or at least two Republican values at play here. On the one hand, you have Second Amendment rights, and on the second hand, you have kind of business/private property rights. So the State Fair of Texas is a private 501c3 charity organization. It's a private organization, and it rents out Fair Park from the city of Dallas, I believe, or Dallas County, but I believe the city of Dallas, for whatever its run is, 3-4 weeks in September, October every year. Millions of people go through it. It's amazing. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I think about getting a Fletcher's corny dog and realize I'm not at the State Fair and can't get it. But it's a public space, typically. And Texas has passed a number of Second Amendment laws that allow people to conceal carry and open carry and constitutional carry. And the State Fair has a policy where certain types of gun holders or license holders or lack thereof are not able to bring their weapons into the fair. It boils down to a question of who they want in and out. Well, Ken Paxton is saying this is a violation because it's public property. Now, there was a case that he ruled on, or he did a letter on, that's been slightly different. And there's been a lot of changes since he did this Attorney General letter. So oftentimes agencies and local jurisdictions will ask the Attorney General for an opinion on how the law should be interpreted before they do something. And there was a case where a gun show or a Texas State Rifle Association or something like some organization was running out of space, and or vice versa, and there was a similar issue with a much smaller venue. And he ruled in that case that they had the right to limit. So I guess it wouldn't have been the Rifle Association, but you had some sort of. That was the issue, right? Like the private organization was renting out the public space. So when the private organization control that space, they could restrict it. It'd be like if you went to, if you rented a pavilion at the local park, and you put up some barriers because you were having a band or whatever, and you wanted to let people in and out to ticket it, you can do that. It's not typically. People don't typically have to pay to go to the park, but you've rented out the park and you've now renting out the space because you have expenses to pay for, like an ACL, like at the State Fair itself, right? You control that space, and the limits of what that control is not specifically addressed in state law. And the way they've done some of the gun legislation is kind of confusing. Paxton may very well be right as a matter of law. it seems to me as if it's something that the legislature needs to probably address pretty quickly. But I think overall, the state fair should probably be able to limit who can and cannot bring guns into the park while they're hosting their event for a number of reasons. First off, they have to pay for calamity insurance or like mass casualty insurance. These big events, there have been several cases where people get trampled. There are, look at Las Vegas, where they had that mass shooting, which is still wild, but it's a whole other thing. Like those events have mass casualty insurance to pay the families and pay for all the lawsuits that happen from those events. That's going to make ticket prices go up. That's going to make their costs go up. Who is going to pay for that increased cost if you're allowing the insurance companies get to determine that there's going to be a greater risk because more people have it? There's also questions of, they have a liquor license. I don't know how it's addressed in law. I'm not a lawyer. This isn't I don't know this area well. I know you can't bring guns into bars. That's still illegal in Texas. You can't have a firearm in a bar. Right. The Taxpayer, Texas is a big bar while it's there because they have beer at every 50 feet. They have liquor you can buy, I believe. I feel like I've had liquor at the state fair, but I don't remember. Man, maybe the liquor worked. But all that to say is there's all sorts of elements to this where it isn't a clear-cut case of, we should be able just to take our guns someplace. If somebody's rented out a property, they control that property. It's like they rented out a house or whatever else. They rented out office space. And if it's a closed environment, ticketed environment, any sort of thing like that, they should probably be allowed to restrict it because people have rights on who they associate with. There are any number of rights at play at any given time. You have to figure out how those rights interplay. And I don't know necessarily if the Second Amendment should usurp that freedom of association. Freedom of association is the First Amendment. Second Amendment's there to protect the First Amendment, but if you don't have that First Amendment right, then what's the point of the Second Amendment? I'm open to arguments on it. I'm not saying I'm absolutely right. And as a matter of law, and that's the Attorney General's job, Paxton might be right in this case. So in this rare case, I'm not necessarily like condemning him or thinking he's like, he might be right. But I don't know if he should be. So that's big news happening right now. Kind of let's transition a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about what's going to go on with the show for the next few weeks. Andy's left the show, and I'm trying to kind of determine how I want to do it. I'm moving it to Fridays. That's news. So let's hear this out. Friday. Not Wednesdays anymore, Fridays. Wednesday was a good idea, but does not work out very well when it comes to just how the news cycle works with Texas politics. So you try to do a show on Wednesday, a lot of news happens on Mondays and Tuesdays and even on Wednesdays, where this isn't very useful for a lot of people who listen to it because the news is already old between the time when we record it and when we release it. Lots of stuff stops happening after about the end of the workday on Thursdays, and Fridays stuff still happens, but it's not as much. So it's easier to record on a Thursday night, release on Friday, and not miss a ton of stuff that happens in the news cycle. Secondly, just figuring out the topics and the tone and everything like that. Do we want to interview more people? We want to do more of me doing this monologuing. We kind of want to separate it out. I don't know. Any feedback? A lot of people who watch this listen to or follow me on Twitter can send me a direct message, or know me personally, have my cell, can reach out to me. Have my email, can email me. I want to hear what you enjoy more. Do you enjoy more of the kind of listening about topics, kind of talking to newsmakers, a little bit of both? I'm leaning towards a little bit of both, but I want to kind of get that fleshed out a little bit, think about it. Also looking at just how I can make enough money off this where it at least pays for itself. This is not just a labor of love. It's not just time that goes into this. There's money that goes into it. Just being able to publish this on podcasts, platforms, costs money for having different services to do it. Hosting a website, hosting the email. tools so that we can actually put out any amount of content, like this banner and stuff on the video, the descriptions and stuff. It takes time. If it didn't take time, you save a little bit of money. Got to figure out some ways to make money. Probably going to open up a Patreon or something similar, to allow folks to just keep it going. Just keep it what it is that is. Not looking to massively expand it. Not looking to make a buck. Well, maybe make a buck eventually, but just in the short term, just trying to keep it going, because I don't want folks to have to go behind a paywall. I don't feel like that would work for anybody. But I can't just do this out of love of just out of love of the game, when I'm also putting so much time into making it, because it takes a lot of time to read the stories, to investigate the stories, to know everything, then to kind of write a script, then to record, edit, etc. A lot goes into a podcast. If you're thinking about just going ahead and doing a podcast with your friends, I would strongly recommend not doing it unless you have free time. If you don't have free time, like a few hours of free time a week to do it regularly, you're not, either the product's going to suffer, it's not going to be very good, or you're just not going to have time to do anything else, or it's going to eat other stuff. So those are kind of the things I'm thinking about. But yeah, season 2 starting. We have the election coming up in November. We're going to probably talk a little bit more about some federal issues, probably a lot of state stuff. Probably going to do a deep dive into San Antonio, the San Antonio races. There's 2 big races there that are being targeted. Representative Lujan and Mark LaHood are the Republicans there. Going to dig into those races to kind of see what's happening. We'll talk about some more of the other border races. We're going after Eddie Morales' seat in 74. We're going after 80, the Uvalde seat. The Republican candidate there is McLaughlin. And then we're trying to keep 37 down at the border. We're going to be talking about some of these races and kind of getting into, so what's happening on the ground as best as possible. We're going to be talking to people from those races, who are working on the field, because a lot of what you see on Twitter is people in Austin or people in Parker County or people in Houston, like me, just spouting off. They're not talking to people on the ground. They're not actually in the cities. They're not knocking doors. And we want to hear from the folks where things are happening. We're also going to talk a little bit eventually about what the session is going to look like. Obviously, school choice is going to be the elephant in the room when it comes to what gets done and what doesn't get done. Things are going to lead into that speakers fight, but we're not going to really know how that's going to go. Oh, sorry, not speaker fight. That battle. There's going to be a speaker fight. Speaker fight's already ongoing. So we have the speaker fight. We have the school choice fight. We have all this stuff going on that are going to be that aren't going to really be close to getting settled until after the election. And I think if you're watching a conservative Republican podcast and you're not focused on winning in November, you're focused on whatever's going to happen in Austin in January, then you're part of the Austin swamp. And you need to get right with the Lord and start focusing on winning in November. So that's the way of the world. So that's where I'm going to leave it. That's the note I'm going to end it on. If you have comments, hit us up on X at the Seeing Red Pod, at GW Fulce. Email me at hosts at seeingredpodcast.com. The stuff's in the bottom. You can follow all those links, man. Like, we want to hear from you. I want to hear from you. I want to respond to you, and I want to talk to you about like what you want to listen to. And if you're interested in coming on the show, I mean, if you're in Austin, or if you work on a campaign, or you work for, or you're a legislator, or you work in media, pitch me. I'd love to have people on the show and talk to. So reach out to me on Twitter, on direct messages, or X, or email, or whatever. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again. And you know what? I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
You've been listening to the Seeing Red podcast. It's always Texas politics and beyond. We present the facts and opinions. The Seeing Red podcast with your host, Andi Turner and Garrett Fulce. Thank you, and tune in next week. And please do us a favor. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode.